Right.
Or good thing Matt has me as a backup. I suppose it's not really a good thing that Matt has me as a backup, because every time we try something new, we're live now, by the way. Every time we try something new, I manage to screw it up somehow. So here we are. Welcome, everyone, to Undersampled Radio episode 28, which is a live open video call. Anyone who wants to join can join, although...
Anyone?
Anyone. Although somehow I've messed up and not anyone can join. So if you'd like to join, please send me a message on Software Underground, or go to the show notes, which the link is on the YouTube description, and post your email address in there, and I will invite you, just like I'm about to invite Tanis right now. Matt, you're here with Evan. Evan made it. What's going on?
Hello.
Hi. Yep, certainly am here. Today's all gone a bit horribly wrong because, for complicated reasons, schools. So I'm at home with the kids, in fact. I've sent them off to watch their favorite TV show. So I'm a great parent and everything. And Evan is actually down at the hub. Where are you, Evan? Are you in one of the phone booths where I normally am?
Yeah, I'm in the big red comfy chair using your headphones and your microphone.
Wait, the real question, Evan, is the microphone balanced on a set of cacti?
Yes.
That system, I've moved away from that system. It's a prickly subject, but it wasn't working out for me. So it's now on a succulent tripod. Actually not succulent related at all, but a legit tripod. How's the hub today, Evan? Are there other people there?
Yeah, no, it's good. Lonely without you, I guess. Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to be missed, sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, so it's one of those grey, dreary days in Nova Scotia. So I'm hoping it brightens up. I was thinking about going for a run later. Now I'll be taking the kids with me. Actually, they do enjoy. I don't drag them out at all. There's no coercion involved.
That sounds like a bold-faced lie.
Sometimes there's a little bit of persuading needs to happen. That's normal. It's normal for kids to cry while they're being persuaded. I'm joking, of course. So, read any good papers lately? Did we lose Evan? Don't tell me I'm...
No, I'm here.
Okay. You just...
He's sorry, Evan. He's talking to you
No,
because
I'm trying to make conversation.
I'm listening. I'm not used to like, oh.
You can interact. We give you
Speak
permission.
when spoken to, boy.
Still nothing.
So, read any good papers lately? I'm not letting that question go.
I get my November issue of the Leading Edge. Well, it came in the mail yesterday. So right. For whatever reason, it takes 27 days for it to make it to Canada. And this month is featuring some near surface imaging, so refractions and tomography stuff. So I feel like it's something we see in some of the odd processing jobs we oversee, I guess, is confusion around, the very shallowest of the shallow parts of the near surface. And yeah,
I must say I tend not. Don't you normally pay a lot of attention to near surface stuff? I know SEG sort of flirted with merging, I suppose, with some kind of near surface geophysics group, but then they kind of backed away from it. I think when the downturn hit, maybe they both decided, like, I don't know, that they couldn't afford it, or it wasn't going to be advantageous, or whatever. So it didn't happen. But yeah, they still, and First Break does as well, they still carry lots of near surface content. Like, what are is it mostly seismic processing that stuff's sort of going into, or are there archaeologists and stuff who actually do near surface interpretation reading it, or where's it going?
I think it's a little bit more of using seismic reflection data sets and like doing first break and refraction analysis for shallow velocity models, I guess, using tomography. So not small scale for like archaeology and stuff that I was looking at.
Right, but to do imaging better. I
think so. And if there's shallow channels and stuff like quaternary channels and things like that. I've had a question, and I'll throw this out there. It is like for land-based seismic data, why isn't there always a ground level pick, if you like, or a ground level spike, or can we kind of bake that into all land-based seismic sections? The idea being that time zero is floating at some seismic reference data above ground level, and like why isn't that done? And ultimately you need a replacement velocity, right? And I always feel like, especially when you have geology outcropping at the surface, the question is, where's ground level on this section, kind of thing.
Yeah. What? So because just add it in processing essentially as a convenience.
Yeah. You're telling me what the replacement velocity is. Actually, just like give me a spike so I can, make my surface maps tie with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. Like, why don't we do that? It wouldn't be. In fact, it would be easy to do even in post-processing, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, if you followed our advice about, asking for elevations and all that kind of thing, replacement velocity,
right?
And replacement velocity is definitely like one of those things that isn't always carried in the header from volume to volume. Like we've ended up in situations where I've been on projects where everybody knows that the replacement velocity is 2,000 meters per second or 1,800 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you're going to actually read the processing report, and it isn't. Mm-hmm. It was different on like one of the surveys or whatever.
And this is the very pun intended, but this is literally scratching the surface of why velocity model building for depth conversion and other uses is such a rat's nest of a subject. Is like we can't even really figure out where ground level is. Like, so how are you going to, to me, that's the number one thing for building a velocity model. It's on land, I guess, is like start with where the ground level is and then go down from there. So this idea is, for the people who aren't following the conversation on Swung on Slack, I think Alessandro, chimed in on this idea of, collaborating some kind of velocity model building worksheet or roadmap, I guess, right? Because, and I feel like this is aligned with that.
Yeah. So like, do you think he's thinking about a kind of decision tree type of a flow chart?
Yeah. I think so. Like, here are my ingredients. What's the recipes that are available to me, basically, is how I would think about it.
Yeah, right. I always really liked, like Depth Theme Express was one of Landmark's products that I actually really liked, and it sort of, people would give it a hard time, or it didn't get a lot of sort of marketing attention, but it's actually a really, really nice piece of software. And if you read the manual, the software was actually sort of a little bit opinionated about the workflow. It was definitely possible to do silly things in there. But the workflow, I think, was actually really sensible, with the idea that you start with, oh, hey, Tennis.
Hey.
Hey, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
We'll go back to depth conversion in a minute. Where are you?
I'm at home in Syracuse right now, or my temporary home for a couple more weeks.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And when was your defense, your Viva?
Monday afternoon.
Oh, wow. just the other day.
Oh,
That's
congratulations!
Amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
And they're going to let you out on good behavior.
Hopefully. Pass the defense. Still need to get some papers published or submitted before I can actually get the degree. But
I see. Okay,
yeah.
that's a major component, obviously.
Yeah.
Tell us what your dissertation was about.
Studying the sedimentary record or stratal record through seismic of the structural evolution of a rift basin in the East African Rift System. So doing work in Lake Malawi.
How much seismic data is there out there?
There's a few, we have about 4 or 5 vintages of 2D seismic there, all of which has been collected for research purposes, including some that we actually went last year and collected.
Nice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you went and placed dynamite out there, or what?
We had some air guns.
Ah.
Air guns on the lake, yeah.
It's marine lacustrine seismic.
Lacustrine seismic, yeah. Yeah, we tend to talk about onshore versus offshore instead of marine versus land.
Yeah. And is there any transition zone mess? No.
No, and parts of the lake. Yeah, parts of the lake you can't. Partly because of local fishing, we couldn't get within 3 kilometers of the shoreline anyway, and then half of the lake are these steep border faults because it's a rift basin where you have like mountains that are 1 kilometer above the lake, and so I don't know.
Wow.
The water depth changes pretty quickly around there, and so I don't know how much transition zone stuff you can do. And there's not a lot of onshore work there, even just geology work, because the terrain's not really that friendly.
Right. Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And that was an entirely kind of an academic crew, or did you guys hire a pro crew, or what?
It was an academic crew.
Right.
So there was a big NSF project to study extinction and magmatism in Malawi and northern Tanzania, and collecting the seismic data was only part of that. But they dropped ocean bottom seismometers into the lake, and so we have some refraction data as well. So some of the time we were shooting for reflection data, and sometimes we were shooting to target these lake bottom seismometers and a seismograph network onshore too, to try and get some deep crustal information.
What's the difference in acquisition geometries for reflection seismic data and refraction seismic data?
Big source. Like much bigger source and longer shooting times, mostly because the air guns needed more time with the bigger source. Like for the seismometers, we were trying to shoot, each shot would be close to 2,000 cubic inches, whereas it would be half or a quarter of that for the reflection seismic.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
An air cannon.
Yeah.
While we have this intro stream going on, and because Matt and Evan know each other so well, and the rest of us don't know Evan because he has not yet been on this show, Evan, give us your background, what you do, who are you?
Sure.
Who are you and what do you want?
Why are you in this club?
Apologies to the viewing public. My video doesn't seem to be working, but yeah, I primarily work with Matt. I live in Halifax, so we're about 80 kilometers apart. I'm sort of the second part of Agile in all of our various pursuits. I'm geophysicist with coding habits, I guess, similar to Matt. And that's, I guess we've been doing this partner thing at Agile for, was it 5 years now, I guess? So,
yeah, nearly 6, yeah. But I think your background's a bit similar to Graham's in that you started off in physics, right?
Right, yeah. I did a undergrad in physics from Victoria, and I did a master's degree in sort of rock physics and that. So, yeah.
I
guess so. Yeah.
Two questions. Number one is, how far is 80 kilometers in a real distance?
I'm trying to think of
what do you need?
I don't know any other measurement systems.
Nautical
I guess you
nautical
use
miles.
That are sensible nautical miles.
Right.
Probably 50 nautical miles. Yeah.
Okay, good. Question 2 is one that I ask most of our guests when they. Thank you, Matt. Are you going to? That would matter if you were going to race horses to the hub, I suppose. It's interesting to know where people's academic interests lie and how they fell into this thing they're doing right now. And I especially enjoy that when the educational background is physics, because I'm a physics nerd myself. But more importantly, and I think probably what everybody watching wants to know is what's your most interesting project that you're working on right now?
Oh. Well, most interesting. Matt and I are pretty excited about some of the machine learning stuff we're doing with lithology prediction, and we have some large ambitions. It's kind of an open-ended project, so to speak. It's fairly researchy, I guess. I've been spending a fair bit of my time doing some contract work at the provincial government, the Nova Scotia Department of Energy, helping them doing this very important and actually ungratifying work of trying to bring 40 or 50 years of geoscience history, from decomposing paper documents into sort of a modern usable format. It's hard, unsatisfying work, but I guess I'm enjoying it because I sort of feel like I'm a bit of a rediscoverer of 50 years worth of geoscience. Some surveys shot by Texaco back in 1968. It's kind of amazing to kind of play, go back into the history of geoscience and stuff. So
yeah, it's like archaeology.
Exactly. Yeah. Have you had to do any of that as well, Tanis? Like trying to dig around for the data?
Yeah. So I'm kind of lucky. My advisor actually did his PhD in Malawi, and so all of the seismic data that we have has all been work that he's actually been involved in the acquisition of all of it, going back, back to some of the stuff that was collected in the 80s. What I have had to do is dig around to try and find onshore geology maps, and the basin that I work in has 3 different countries bordering the shorelines of it, and so I've had to dig around and try and combine these geological maps from different companies or different countries where they don't line things up, and then trying to find records of work that people have done there. And it's a lot of the work is really old, and you have to dig to find some of the data that you need to understand what's been done previously. And
sounds just like Nova Scotia. the African Republic of Nova Scotia. And what's going to be next for you? Like, Graham's question about, I guess the most exciting project you're working on right now is finishing your PhD.
Yeah, getting my papers submitted, and I'm presenting at AGU in San Francisco in 2 weeks. So I'm moving back to Canada. My passport actually expires on January 5th, so I need to get back to Canada.
Wow.
And I have something in the works, a lead on an unofficial job offer, but nothing's formalized yet. And I'm a little bit, I don't like to say too much until everything's in writing. So
yeah, right. Yeah, no, very wise. Well, that's awesome. Assuming that job offer is also in Canada, that would be a win for Canada, having you back in the country.
It seems really important to get back to Canada before, January 20th.
Right. Yeah, well, that'll be cool. But I don't know. New York State sounds kind of cool place to hang out too. I'm sure you've had fun there. It's
been interesting, yeah. Very interesting to be in a part of New York State that is very different from New York City.
Yeah, right.
It's actually, Syracuse itself is a fairly liberal city because there's the university here and there's teaching hospitals, but the surrounding counties are very, very conservative. We were on a field trip once just outside of the city, and someone was a little bit worried we were getting too close to their land, and so they started firing warning shots to keep us off their land.
Oh man, that's exciting. How's the rugby team up there at Syracuse doing?
Rugby team?
Yeah, I used to know some of the rugby players at Syracuse.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They are pretty low on the sports radar here, so I'm not following them too much. So I don't know. I know.
Okay. Well, I'll look into it. I'll let you know. Don't worry. I'll keep you updated.
Yeah, I should look that up, but it's something I've never encountered.
Or you can completely ignore it because you're about to be out of there.
Well, it's funny because when I TA'd in the Earth Sciences department, we have in our intro classes, we end up getting a lot of athletic students. And so I've taught students from quite a few of the different sports, but I don't remember having any rugby players.
How do you like teaching?
Some days I like it and some days I don't. Actual teaching I love, grading I hate.
Standard.
And dealing with the all the whining and excuses and requests for special treatment, I'm not so fond of either.
Which subjects have you taught in the past?
So introductory geology and / geophysics, basin analysis, tectonics, oceanography, and sedstrat.
Nice.
It seems like some of those subjects would be more advanced levels of coursework than others.
Yes.
Do you find that you like teaching the higher levels more than the intro levels?
They're very, very different. The intro level, you're trying to get people excited enough about something, and trying to get them to actually care about what they're learning about. The upper level stuff, you're teaching either grad students or students who are majoring in geosciences, and so that's a lot more challenging because they ask harder questions and all like that. But so I think there's the interaction with the students at the upper level ones. I like the scientific and kind of technical component of it better because we get further into depth. But with intro students, I love it when you actually see them start getting excited about it and see them starting to grasp these new concepts for the first time, and that part is really rewarding.
Cool. Yeah, I think that I could see both sides of that issue. I mean, it's got to be fascinating to work with upper level students and really encouraging to work with entry level undergraduates. It's cool.
Yeah.
So I see you've put a question here in the show notes, and I think that this is a really interesting one that both Matt and Evan have thought a lot about. So let it rip.
Well, it's something that's come up a lot in my research as I'm trying to quantify things in seismic data, is how do we deal with the uncertainty that we have? I'm working in a basin where we have a drill site that penetrates about 15% of the depth of the basin, and that's it. Everything else is, seismic. We have a core there, and we have an age model there, but everything deeper than that is an extrapolation. And so we're really wrestling with dealing with the uncertainty and, are we doing enough? And how does academia do it different from how industry does it? And I think the stakes are a lot higher in industry when you have uncertainty in your data, because we're not trying to pick a drilling location. We're just trying to understand the geological history of the area.
Right. Yeah, man. It's a big subject. I mean, my 2 cents is that, I agree that. Yeah, I haven't thought a lot about that difference in objectives. In some way I feel like, well, it's still kind of the same objective, but you're right. You obviously, when you're drilling a well, the other plus is that you also get to find out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I think we often don't look at those as experiments, but they are, they're experiments. I guess the thing that gets me is that there tends to be not a lot of looking back once we've done those experiments. And I think there could be more of that. And the other thing I've always been kind of curious about is that I think we may never find this out until we have like laser drilling or something, which is what happens. How much more quickly can you learn your models if you drill contraindicated wells? Right? And I feel like there's probably places where there's enough, essentially where wells end up being contraindicated in hindsight, right? If you've sort of forgotten the model that you drilled on, then it turns out, oh no, we would never have drilled there. In fact, that is a place where we would drill if we wanted to disprove our hypothesis. But I'm not sure that that's rigorously, that's not, it feels like there's something wrong with that. It feels a bit tautological or something. But I maybe those are things you could simulate, in a decent data set. And I don't see many people working that up. And I'll just finish by saying the stuff that I'm really glad to see researchers like Claire Bond at Aberdeen, and I think he's called Andrew Curtis at Edinburgh, who are actually going out and doing experiments with interpreters and with geological conceptual model building. I think that's really important work, and we should do more of that. But I'll let Evan say something, because I know he's thought a lot about this too.
Yeah, Matt and I, this is kind of a favorite subject between us, and one of the things that I think we're not very good at is sort of all the vocabulary around the types of uncertainty. Claire Bond's work he's described it as conceptual, or like geological conceptual uncertainty. But there's there's like measurement precision. Like if you're a cabinet maker, you want things to be accurate on your ruler, and so there's different types of ways of things having uncertainty, right? Or like it's a different kind of uncertainty than, say, you would do in undergraduate physics labs, right? Where like plus or minus your measurement error and propagating those things. But I do feel like I like the idea of having maybe we need more tools or toys or games to kind of go through. I have these 5 ways of changing my map. What are them? What's going to make my map change the most, or make my interpretation change the most? And you talk to people about, like, should I move this position of this fault interpretation, 50 feet in that direction? Claire Bond's work, like, well, maybe it's the throw on that fault, which you can't see on the seismic data. That's a much larger uncertainty anyways, right? So I feel like we're not very good at like prioritizing the impact of the different uncertainties. Right,
there's some kind of sensitivity analysis. What sort of stuff? Because I remember sort of tweeting with you probably a couple of years ago now about some uncertainty around like finding things on 2D lines and that kind of stuff. How has the uncertainty crept into your thesis work?
Well, I mean, I have the advantage of a bunch of different data sets, so I do a lot of mapping, and I'm really thinking about, regionally what I see when I look at 2D lines. But other people have interpreted the same 2D data and interpreted completely different things that I just really don't think make sense in a 3-dimensional basin. And so I'm really careful about trying to quantify as much as I can and integrate as many different, look at things from as many different intersecting 2D lines and make as many maps as I can to do that. But and thinking about the processing, and I have a unique background because I did my undergrad in geophysics, and now I'm doing, the geological side of working with seismic data. So, but I definitely think a lot more about what artifacts are versus what's actually real. And that's actually one big point we had a big discussion about during my defense on Monday, was stuff that I don't think is real, and that other people do think is real. And so that changes how we interpret it.
Right.
So we run into that. But I mean, we're trying to extrapolate information, particularly from this one core that we have in this one age model. And we're trying to make estimates about the age of the basin because, extrapolating an age model is a terrible idea, and especially when you don't have any constraints on the lithologies or the porosities or anything below that. But it's still the best data that we have right now. And so we're, trying to figure out the best way to approach that. And I think we are going to go into sensitivity testing. But a lot of I have one paper that's going to be submitted where a lot of that it's full of just like detailed information saying, these previous interpretations aren't really valid, and they're based on, one particular 2D line. Well, here's another 2D line that shows that they're wrong. that kind of, not explicitly like that, but
but it's fairly kind of what's the word, methodical analysis of idea after idea. Yeah,
you're right.
I mean,
like with all the data that we have, here's the framework for this basin.
Right. Yeah, like looking at the implications of an interpretation and then testing those implications.
Yeah.
The real versus not real thing is kind of interesting. Is that you as sort of your position was that they were like processing artifacts or something like that? Have you been processing these data, or?
Actually, the new data we collected, I processed. So that's the really cool thing about this part of my work, and kind of 2 chapters of my dissertation is I was involved in planning some lines, targeting some structures that I wanted to look at in more detail, did the acquisition of them, did the processing of them, and now I'm doing the interpretation of them. So that's, I mean, how many people get the chance to do that as part of their PhD?
Awesome.
So I've done the processing on them, and it's a lot of it has to do with, well, there's a bunch of mud dye appears but the problem, because we're looking at them in 2D, there's a lot of out of plane stuff that we're seeing in there. And so that's a place where, if you interpret the diffractions as on lap, that completely changes your interpretation of what's going on.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So how do you quantify? You mentioned that you guys were thinking about moving into sensitivity analysis. How do you quantify, and how do you keep track of the uncertainty or errors in not only the seismic data, but in the entire experiment? Do you have a collated record?
Sort of. A lot of it is just kind of addressed a lot of the uncertainties addressed qualitatively as part of the write-up of the method. Say, these are some issues that we can't properly address right now. We acknowledge that they're there, but we can't really, there's not a lot we can do about them. But the one thing I am working on right now is, where I've got this age model that someone else published from the core, and I've created the synthetic to tie that core to the seismic data. But then I want to extrapolate, first of all, the time depth curve below the depth of the core using interval velocities. So then those are calculated from stacking velocities. So I need to keep track of those. Then I want to extrapolate the age model. So I need to keep track of the error in there, and the absolute error in the actual part of the age model I can keep track of and kind of apply through. But again, this is somewhere where I don't know if there's really a way to quantify if I'm misinterpreting the seismic facies and the lithology is totally different from what I think it is. I don't think I can quantify that.
Right.
But then also looking at whether or not it's a mud basin. So do we need to be decompacting everything when we have no porosity, don't have really good porosity control? And that's what the big thing I need to fix this week. Is kind of consolidating all of the different attempts I've made at sensitivity analysis and uncertainty in there, and find a way to consolidate that in a way that's actually presentable.
Yeah, right.
So this is related to a question that Martin posted in the show notes, and this is geared towards industry professionals, though I'm sure, thank you, Evan, I'm sure that you encounter this in academia too, and that is, how do you, and I guess this question I'm aiming at Matt. How do you explain things like uncertainty, error, quantitative analysis, maybe is a stretch, to someone that is not a specialist in a field, is not does not have an academic background, doesn't understand what you mean when you say, this is my interpretation with a 25% error. Interpretive leisure. I mean, I have a tough time getting the data constraints across to business managers, etc. How do you deal with that type of thing?
There is a real, well, from a couple of angles, there's a desire among, usually you've got some kind of client, right, for an idea, like someone that needs to know your output so that they can make a decision and so on. And often the system that they're propagating your information into has no way of recognizing these uncertain parameters, right? They need an answer, like a volume or a depth or a well prognosis or whatever. And their spreadsheet or their model just can't accommodate. So so that's one place where there's sort of it's a kind of cultural pressure, I guess, to collapse the uncertainty. But I think there's also a bit of especially in exploration, there's a bravado of the explorationist kind of cultural pressure to spin the story and, have this kind of tight, self-consistent play or prospect description that people can get comfortable with. I think that they can feel like, yeah, all the evidence does line up. You're right. That, that's why there's porosity preserved there, and that's why there's migration into that trap or whatever. And I think that actually comes from a general geological culture of storytelling. So this is kind of a strong word for it, but I mean that's kind of what basin analysis and because the fact is we'll never know the answers to a lot of these questions. Like they'll remain in the geological past forever, and so you sort of feel like an explanation with error bars on everything isn't really an explanation somehow. And so there's so much pressure basically in the end to gloss over or to sort of say, to basically answer the question, yeah, we get all that, but what do you really think it is, kind of thing. And like I say, I don't think we're even close to coping with that, but I feel like just trying not to fall into the trap of storytelling, essentially. Because just like Tanis says, like the people who preceded her in these interpretations, perhaps with a little bit less data, essentially made their interpretations as if that was the story they were going with, kind of thing. The sequence of events and the tectonic history and the sedimentologic response and so on. And like she says, either they missed something, they didn't have enough data to make that call, but later it's like, well, that's not possible. And so they kind of blew it in a way. And I guess the scary, right? I mean, kind of like if you didn't include that, so that's not to say that you won't turn out to be wrong later. But I mean,
you get cited more if you're wrong though, so
yeah, the extent to which you can kind of accommodate the bits that aren't knowable yet or whatever.
Let me ask a related question in a similar way. Evan, how do you sell to a client a machine learning solution? And do you, for example, do you try to quantify errors? Do you try to pitch the minimization of error in the interpretive solution? I mean, I have no idea what the machine learning thing you guys are working on does.
Right.
But I mean, is error one of these things which you try to incorporate in the sales pitch?
Yeah, I mean, we're asking similar questions of what do people want or care about, and what's important to me or what I feel passionate about may not be, people may not care. Like people just might want to know, where is the reservoir? Give me your best prediction of reservoir, as opposed to show me, the probability of that point in space being reservoir or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you would say your prediction, if you show the reliability of the prediction to people, you can't really hide behind anything anymore, right? Like it's as good as it is. Like you can't, to me, there's you're making the data vulnerable, I guess. And to me, there's that, it aligns with this notion of, it being, that's what good science is, right? It should be like everything exposed. So to me, that it's part of the prediction, right? Is the uncertainty. Like, like going back to this idea of like how silly numbers are, right? Like if I said like what's the average intelligence of a first year geology class, and you tell me, you know, the average class score was 60% on the test, you know, that it doesn't, you know, what you really care about is the distribution, right? Like, and especially in natural resources, when we're looking for two standard deviations above the mean, usually we're looking for the 99th percentile or the 1 percentile extremes, and yet we throw averages around all the time, right? Like we're not very good at, you know, averaging. If we're looking for the needle in the haystack, why do we keep averaging stuff? And so I feel like, yeah, but it's hard, right? People don't want to look at like probabilities. I think the culture is maybe a little bit more process driven or engineering driven, where like you need an answer, not a bunch of ranges of answers, right? So
I do feel like I hope. I mean, I guess we're gambling in a way that people will appreciate having access to some, like, along with the prediction curve. Let's say there's an uncertainty curve, but I don't think people know quite what to do with it. You know, because it's not necessarily trivial to use that as a weighting function, say, in the next thing you're going to do, like build a static geomodel or whatever it might be. So there's some just like, what do I do with that information? And that's partly a training thing, and it's partly a software thing, and it's partly a kind of partly that cultural stuff I was talking about. But there's also, I think, just, you know, it's a bit like with the sort of 20% chance of showers or 40% chance of rain tomorrow. It's like, well, what does that mean? It means if we have tomorrow 10 times, it'll rain 4 times. but we're only going to have tomorrow once. And there was a bit of confusion about that after the election, right? People were like, oh, the chances of Trump winning were only 20% or whatever, so you guys were wrong. And it's like, well, that's not really what a 20% chance of winning. A 20% chance of winning doesn't mean that he's not going to win, right? So there's, I guess, just intellectual confusion about what these numbers even mean, never mind what to actually do with them if you do understand them. So there's a lot of baggage there. And yeah, talking about it and giving people uncertainties and things and being like sort of delivering it, I think is obviously, it's necessary but insufficient. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Evan, I want to give you a this is a total pivot, but I want to give you a chance to ask one of the few questions that you've put in the notes. I have one of them is my favorite, but I'm going to let you pick your favorite and ask it here.
Oh, well, I hope I picked the right one, but well, yeah, I guess I'll choose the second one I put in there, which is
yes.
Like, you know, the upstream oil and gas industry or the natural resources industry is, you know, has a lot of historical stuff like paper seismic data, you know, like and I wonder like what a company like Google would do if they decided to get into like, you know, subsurface characterization, or, you know, like they've basically taken over a lot of other domains. Like how would they do resource exploration, like versus like how Chevron does it, that kind of thing, and like what does that mean, and why aren't they doing it? Have they just decided that there's too much baggage of like things that need to be modernized in order to kind of do it properly? Yeah, and other folks have comments about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like in contrast, the contrast between Google and Chevron is agility, among other things, right? Mm. I mean, for a very large company like Google is, they seem to remain sort of in a state of learning from an outsider's perspective, and I would hope that what would Google do scenario in resource exploration would lead to modernization of technical. I would imagine that it would lead to a modernization of technical practices. And I also think that that's happening already. With the resources, the scope of resources that Chevron has is on par or above what Google has. And so you'd like to see an acceleration of this modernization of technology. But Chevron is a big company and they have a lot of assets to protect, right? So it feels like they need to move slowly and not jump the gun. I don't know. What would a budding geoscientist going into industry do, Dennis?
I don't know. I actually did spend some time in industry between undergrad and grad school, working with private geophysical service companies in Calgary. And I mean, the big thing that the biggest barrier we always came up against was, everyone's just trying to protect their data. And so that was, I think finding ways to share resources without compromising the assets is a really, really important thing. I remember working as a processor, getting a set of lines in from one client one time that we had just processed for a different client a few weeks before, and we had to start again completely from scratch because we can't share that kind of knowledge in between our stuff. And it just seems like there's got to be less redundant ways to still protect everyone's interests without having to reinvent the wheel every time you're working with someone else's data.
One thing I would comment on too is it's maybe not just like Google's capacity for building technologies on top of data, but there's this other idea of like, why don't geoscientists, or what's the obstacle between more geoscientists embracing this notion of like version control in their work? There's a lot of projects, interpretation projects and geocellular model projects where some of these tools are coming into play, but I feel like culturally or professionally, like this notion of like, how GitHub works and how software developers innovate so quickly is because of these types of technologies. And like they are technologies, right? And I feel like, to me, there's a human problem as much as there's a technical problem in how we do our work, right? How we name our files, how we press save. I want to play the history button and see how my replay and see how my map is changing as I collect more data. Like those things, I feel like there's a lot of simpler stuff that we could do just in how we work on these projects, right? Comments?
I agree. One of the challenges I see, which is not even restricted to industry, is convincing more senior people that more expensive isn't always better. And that, there's a lot to be said for open source work and things like a lot of the data that I try and quantify, I pull out of our expensive seismic interpretation package and I try and get it into, I use R for a lot of things. So I try and make analyze a lot of the numbers, the numerical stuff I do in R because I have full control over it and it's easy to play around with things and there's no black boxes involved in that. But it sometimes has been a hard sell to convince people that really is the best way to do it.
Lucas says, how many industry professionals have used version control? Do they know what it is? Do they, without exposure, you can't change your mind about things?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
The concept, yeah.
Yeah, the concept. I mean, I would say people are, there's some kind of version control built into SharePoint, which a lot of corporate people are, unfortunately for them, familiar with. I say unfortunately for them, just to be explicit about it, because SharePoint is a terrible, terrible piece of software.
Here comes another lawsuit.
Wikipedia has version control, and wikis in general. There are corporate wikis. Dropbox has version control. Google Docs has version control. So, I mean, I feel like if you haven't, and in fact, if you haven't taken advantage of version control yet, then, another one is really beautifully implemented, right, is the Time Machine, or whatever it's called on the Apple Mac OS, which does that cool kind of animated visualization of previous versions of files. So I feel like if you haven't been in contact with it, then you're sort of not paying attention, probably, or haven't ever had a hard drive failure or emergency like that. Someone did a really nice job of who was it? Do you remember, Evan? I think it was Jacob Fauché in the hackathon in New Orleans, I think. Built a essentially coerced a bunch of geophysical data into GitHub, which sounds bonkers, but one next feature in GitHub that our listeners may be interested to hear about is that GitHub actually will render GeoJSON files as a map. So all you have to do is make a GeoJSON file to go with your data, and you can render like the path of a seismic line, or now I bet you could even, maybe he did this, I don't remember. You could probably even get it to display a seismic horizon in some cunning way. Certainly the extensive one. So, he poked around a little bit, like, what does it look like if I kind of layer version control on a seismic project? So yeah, I'd be amazed if Exxon or Shell or Statoil or one of these more kind of technical companies hasn't perhaps not solved that problem, but hasn't had a really good look at it. I guess the shame is that we'll never find out even if they do nail it. Yeah, maybe we should do a hackathon on kind of methods of reproducibility or something like that in geoscience. I know there's this what's it called, the paper of the future or something like that, some kind of NSF effort to promote more reproducible. Actually, you know what? I think it might be an AGU effort to promote more reproducible science in geophysics. Like we need more of that.
That's related to Chris Jackson's question in the notes about openness in publishing, in academic publishing specifically. His question, which we've addressed several times on the show and have not come up with an answer, but his question is, how do we force that to happen? How do we include more people in the open publishing and reviewing process? And if it's not mainstream enough as is, how do we make that the standard? We need another episode for this.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, Chris, you're out of luck.
I mean, they're great questions. My sort of default mode, and I feel like, in a way, the internet's kind of default mode is like it doesn't rely on a lot of pulling, right? It's sort of like push and make people want to figure it out and just rely on sort of curiosity and people's awesomeness. But yeah, I mean, maybe that can only ever be a marginal modality. I don't know. Like maybe that never goes mainstream, or it just takes 100 years. I'm not sure. Like, what do you see, Tanis, in the academic environment? Are people clamoring to be more open and collaborative online and stuff?
Well, people are trying to think of ways to collaborate, because that seems to be the best way to get grants these days, is if it's a broader impact, more collaborative work. But when it comes to publishing, it's still too cost prohibitive for most academics, I think. Not some institutions have, have funds in place for actually publishing, but if you haven't, if you've got a specific grant, if you haven't made room in your budget in your grant and held on to some of your funds to the end to be able to publish open access, then, you're out of luck, because, even some journals that aren't open access are you still have to pay to publish. And so that's a big problem. And I think, I would love to see more people in academia thinking about why they publish. Are they publishing just for the sake of publishing to get more publications on their CV, which affects, their job prospects or their tenure application, or are they publishing to contribute to the science and to further the work that they're doing and be part of a community of people working on the same problems? Because I think your answers to those questions changes where you want to publish.
Yeah, right. And I would say the similar, you need to answer similar questions if you're like the AGU or SEG about your purpose and whether you're serving the science and the community or whether you're serving, less charitably, I guess, yourself and your organization and its sort of cash situation. You were alluding earlier to like page fees and open access fees, which a lot of people may not realize are like how, if you see an open access paper in SEG in geophysics, it's because the authors have paid SEG like, I think it's $3,000 to bring that paper from behind the paywall. Like a lot of people don't realize that. So like Tana says, if you haven't budgeted for it essentially in your grant, then you're just, it's free to publish a black and white paper in geophysics that's behind the paywall. So yeah, that's
scary.
And it would be so progressive to see a corporation sort of step up and say, and I don't know that SEG even solicit contributions like this, but to see, one of the more sort of enlightened companies sort of step up and say, we're going to pay for the issues 4 of geophysics next year to be open access. They contribute at that scale to SEG all the time. It's just that it goes into a big bucket and who knows, maybe gets spent on terrible coffee at the next meeting.
So if you need a liaison to the SEG, you can talk to Matt Hull.
I can hook you up.
2 minutes left. I want to ask Tanis, what's the most important unsolved question in geophysics?
Probably going back to how you deal with uncertainty. I mean, there aren't a lot of frontier areas left, but in terms of what we do in academia, a lot of the data that we work with is similar to working in frontier areas. And so thinking, how do you deal with the uncertainty when you don't have the empirical constraints that you really would like?
Nice. And that reminds me, actually, I just wanted to mention that I first met Tanis, sort of online on Twitter. That sounds really weird. But she was one of the sort of awesome little posse of people who not only came along to the first unsession that we did at this CSPG conference in Calgary 3 years ago, I think, but was like a host and kind of basically helped manage some of the conversations at one of the tables that we had kind of running at that event. And that was about unsolved problems, and uncertainty was one of the top things there. So yeah, it just reminded me of that event. What was that, like 2013, I think?
Yes, because it was my first year in Syracuse. So yeah.
Okay, right, cool.
Well, thanks, Evan and Tanis, for joining us today. We had an awesome time chatting with you. Sorry we had a little technical difficulty there at the beginning. But we'd love to have you guys back on the show and look forward to seeing what both of you are doing in the future.
All right. Cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Guys, join us. Sorry.
I was just going to say thanks for doing this.
Thank you for
coming.
Join Join us next week for a conversation with someone about getting money for R&D projects. See you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.